Everyone, we got Bob and Bill at Phelps Creek and our second episode of Wine in the Time of COVID. We are out standing in our oldest Chardonnay block, and it's named the Toby block for my second child. This is the vineyard that gives us the basics, the base of our Lynette Chardonnay. But we're going to talk today about the 2017 Columbia Gorge Chardonnay because it has a little bit of a unique story. And we'll get to that story in just out in the vines themselves. And I want to show you a few things. One is we had bud break when we had the first portion of seeing green on the vine. That happened on April 17th. And today, well, what we are at May 11th, and so you can see in just under a month how much growth that we have had now. We're on average 4 to 6 inches of growth, and some shoots I see are even doing more than that. Today we put on shoot thinning at the present time, eliminating some of the green growth. And another thing is just look at where we're standing. I'm not sure if you can see that, or you can see that further down the row. Bill is in a green row, and I'm in one in which we tilled. And the reason we till every other row is to kind of control the vigor in the vines. When we till, we introduce some more nitrogen into the soil. We get a little warmer zone around the plant, and we tend to get a little faster growth. So we'll look at what things are doing in the season and decide if we're going to till or not. We've also done some suckling.
Chardonnay? Everybody knows Chardonnay, but how much do they really know
about
Chardonnay? It's the widest planted grape variety in the world. I'm not sure if it's the most planted, but it's the widest planted because it has the capability of making at least a decent wine under the most extreme growing conditions. So you can grow it in the Central Valley of California where it's really, really hot, even down as far as Bakersfield, and it'll make a wine that people can drink actually. Whereas it also grows in the most northernmost, coolest regions like northern Germany, northern France. So it handles those extremes, and it makes just different types of wines depending on where it's grown and the soils that it's grown on.
So in Burgundy, where of course it's the mother lode of Pinot Noir, the other grape that they grow in that region is Chardonnay. And that is the reason why when Oregon started planting Pinot, because climatically it was very similar to Burgundy, the original pioneers in the Oregon industry planted Chardonnay. And however, it didn't work out according to plan back then. They seemed to have a hard time getting the Chardonnay plants that they had put into the ground ripe. And if they could get them ripe in a really warm year, what ended up happening is the grapes had lost their acidity. So you had this choice. Pick them really early where they didn't have flavor development and a lot of acidity, or pick them later and have lost that acidity and have kind of a flabby wine. So they studied it for a while, and they tried to figure out what the issue was, and they finally came up with it was a matter of the clonal selection, that the plants that they put into Oregon soil in the 60s and early 70s came from California starts, and the most widely planted clone was Davis 108, and that was one that had adapted itself to the California climate, which is much different than Burgundy. And so this wasn't really, working in Oregon. And they found a few places, came into the business in 1990. The seminars that were being held were all about how can we solve this problem? In fact, we have some proposed solution. It's these new set of Dijon clones. And the Dijon clones, they went back to Burgundy, and David Adelsheim found plant material and got it brought into the U.S. and quarantined. It was grown out at Oregon State, and now in the early 1990s, we were sitting down and we were tasting wines made from these new clones, and that's how I ended up selecting what we're in right now. This is Dijon 75 and Dijon 76 clones of Chardonnay. So it's all about getting flavor, but maintaining bright acidity, and to make what we really consider a food wine.
Right. Plus,
well, now it's time to really enjoy the wine. What we have in our glass again is our 2017 Columbia Gorge Chardonnay, and this is grown on 2 sites. The one we just showed you, our estate, and we have really kind of 2 separate blocks on our estate, a newer planting, and we were in the Toby's block, which is the oldest planting, planted in like 1993. And then we also bring in Chardonnay from Underwood Mountain, and that is grown at very high elevation, about 2,000 foot, and brings us some bright acidity. But let's talk about that vintage 2017. As you'll remember, that was the year of the Eagle Creek fire. And so the fire, started about 30 miles away from our vineyard, and fortunately began with an east wind, a very dry east wind, and kind of moved towards Portland before it reversed course to the more common west wind. And when it did, we knew things were going to get serious here, because there was nothing really between us and Eagle Creek other than national forest, and so but those at least those 10 days of moving towards the west and not towards us gave the firefighters a chance to build up their resources. We had firefighters from Idaho and from Eastern Oregon and from Washington, all camped in Hood River, poised to take it on as it got close and defend properties. Well, we're about the furthest west you could be on the Oregon side, so we were right up against the fire break. And in fact, that fire got within 1 mile of us. Well, why does that matter at all? Because that year influenced the wine with a little bit of smoke, and especially in the Pinot Noir, the only wine we released was a very limited amount of Calamity, a smoky Pinot Noir. In the white wines, it was much less evident, although we know our wines pretty well, we know our fruit pretty well. We could detect a little bit of it. So, Bill, what did we end up deciding to do in 2017?
Well, 2017 was obviously unique for that reason, and fortunately the white wines all turned out really quite well, I think. But still, the style was a little bit different than our normals. So for 2017, we decided that we were not going to do our regular dual Chardonnay thing, where we do a Columbia Gorge plus a special Lynette bottling, and we combined everything together. So for the 2017, all the special barrels that would have been part of the Lynette ended up in the Columbia Gorge. So it made it, if anything, it made it a more exceptional wine than it normally is.
Well, it pretty recently got 93 points by James Suckling, so they really liked the wine also. This is also the first year that we really had kind of a big inclusion of puncheons. Is that right?
That's true. We're in the middle of doing a transition for how we're making predominantly the Lynette Chardonnays, and this may work its way into the Columbia Gorge Chardonnays as well. Typically, we do all of our Chardonnays in what's called a Burgundian style, where the grapes are squeezed whole cluster in our wine press, and then the juice is put into barrels, and yeast is added. It's fermented in the barrel, each individual barrel, and then once all the sugar is gone and the wine is dry, then we start doing what's called bâtonnage, which just means stirring of the wine to keep the dead and the dying yeast cells in suspension. It adds back some flavors and some texture to the wine that you don't get unless you do that.
Now these barrels you're mentioning, these are basically 60-gallon barrels.
That's always been our standard size barrel, 228 liters, and so 60 gallons, and the process is to just leave that in the barrels and let it age until it's perfect for the flavors that we want, and then we make our blends, selecting out the best barrels for Lynette, and everything else goes to the Columbia Gorge. Now, we combine everything for 2017, so instead of doing the two different blends, it all went together. But on top of that, in 2016, we started an experiment with puncheons. A puncheon is basically a large barrel, almost 2.5 times the size of a regular barrel, and the wine behaves differently when it's put into a puncheon. You can age it for a longer period of time without getting so much oak in the wine that the oak overpowers the fruit. But this also means you may need to age the wine longer in order to get the development that you want. So we started this experiment in 2016, and we were working our way into that with the 2017 wines. So this wine is also the first wine where we have a reasonable amount of wine from the puncheons in the blend, and we've been growing the number of puncheons that we're doing. We're up to 12 right now, and we buy 2 or 3 new ones every year. So
it's kind of like from Star Trek, The Trouble with Tribbles. We got puncheons all over the place, and they're big, and so it's a storage issue, but we like the effect. I've noticed it does really change the wine in some really unique ways. So, okay, let's taste the wine and see if we can outdo each other in our descriptors.
Yummy.
Smooth. Now I'm getting, of course I get the citrus, some kind of like lemon zest thing going on. I'm also getting, sometimes if you want to be fancy, say brioche, but this is the breadiness that you get from the yeast, I think.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yes, it's very complex. The fruit is not blast out. It's everything's complex together. So I don't, other than you mentioned, some lemon. That's a common and frequent thing that people get in wine. Maybe some people say that Chardonnay can have some general tropical notes to it, which is a blend of whatever that might be. Much of that comes from different types of barrels that you might use also.
And I am getting this mineral sense, and how I describe that, because that's a great debate in winemaking. But to me, it's a texture of almost a little roughness as it comes across the palate, that it doesn't taste creamy in that mid palate, but you have a little bit of spiciness going on, and a lot of us describe that as minerality.
And Chardonnay, I think, more than any other white wine, handles the flavor that is extracted from the oak better than any other variety. So it loves the proper amount of oak, not an overpowering amount, but the proper amount that blends with the natural flavors of the grape to create something special.
So all of our barrels for this were French, and Most of them were the 228 liter smaller barrels. I think we had 3 or 6, maybe we had 6 that year, of the puncheons.
For 17, yeah, I think
for
so.
17. And they are also French, and they're from specific forests. So we have a couple of manufacturers, and we get down to designating what forest it's going to come from and what toasting level the barrels will be kind of roasted to. There's so many different variables, and we're never satisfied with staying the same way. We want to experiment every year and try something as a barrel amongst the many, and see what we think of it, and see if we want to go in that direction in the future.
And that's what we did with our very first 2016 Chardonnay. We tried a puncheon of the Chardonnay, and then gave it an extra, almost a full year extra of time aging, and really liked the results. And now we're doing much more of that.
Right. It's been very fun. Well, it's been really fun talking with Bill and talking with you about our Chardonnay program, and we hope you get a chance to enjoy this wine soon. Thank you.